This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. The topic, inspired from my watching a recent film, has come out in the last year or two. A standard issue retrospective on the Great Recession. Regulators screwed up. Human nature is such that we blow bubbles and pop them. And now there's a great fix that the government will be able to do for us. The film, Boom Bust Boom, got me thinking about Hyman Minsky. Hyman Minsky, an economist who was not very well known, but after the Great Recession, regulators, central bankers, etc., all looked to him, this dead economist, they all looked to him for insights on the next bubble that will come and will pop. In fact, I'm looking at a headline right now from BBC News. Did Hyman Minsky find the secret behind financial crashes? Let me play an excerpt from this BBC report.
So let's take a closer look at Minsky's 3 stages of finance model, with little help from Eddie Cochran. It applies to all types of debt, but the easiest way to understand it is to think of a typical home mortgage.
Step 1.
The first stage, which Minsky called the hedge stage, comes soon after the previous crisis. Both banks and borrowers are still cautious. Here the borrower has enough cash to pay both the interest and the principal. In other words, a fairly standard capital repayment mortgage.
Step 2. She falls.
As banks and borrowers become more confident, the kind of loan offered changes. We move to Minsky's speculative stage. This is like interest-only mortgages. Now the borrower can only afford to pay the interest charge and not the initial lump sum. But they think it doesn't matter, as the value of their asset, for example the house, is rising.
Step 3.
Eventually, we reach the final stage, Ponzi finance, named after the famous scoundrel, financial fraudster Charles Ponzi. By this point, the previous crisis is forgotten. Asset prices have been rising for years, and no one can imagine a world in which they're falling. So a kind of speculative euphoria develops. Loans are made where the borrower doesn't have enough cash to pay either the principal or the interest. This is like getting a mortgage, making no payments at all for a few years, and then hoping the price of the house has gone up so much you can sell it and make enough to cover the initial loan and all those missed payments.
Just follow steps 1, 2, and 3.
George Magnus.
The lenders obviously have to keep thinking up ingenious or not so ingenious schemes to allow this fictitious world to persist. And usually it's based on kind of a pledge to be able to pay back on the basis that the asset will be worth more tomorrow. Once asset prices start rolling over, then the whole system implodes.
Post-2008, looking at the financial system as a fundamental source of instability might seem obvious. But before 2008, and especially when Minsky developed these ideas in the 1970s, it put him firmly outside the mainstream.
What strikes me about that presentation, reaching back and saying we must learn from Hyman Minsky that he had it all figured out. No doubt a bright man, no doubt an insight. But February 5th, 1637, a date that you should know. Why should you know about February 5th, 1637? What does that have to do with the Great Recession of our last decade? There was a tulip auction in the Netherlands. No buyers showed up. No buyers showed up, and prices crashed. Tulip bulbs, all the rage for the wealthy set, the wealthy jet-setting 1637 set. Tulip bulbs went from 5,000 guilders to 50 guilders. Crashes are not special. Crashes have been around forever. They're nothing new. If you think they're new, or if you think that Hyman Minsky is really giving us some great fantastical new insight into capitalism, i.e., capitalism doesn't go up in a straight line. Capitalism has booms and busts and crashes, which is the normal course of events. Well, folks, you've not been paying attention to history. History is replete with examples on top of examples that go back to the dawn of time. It's human nature that's the problem. Or is human nature the problem? Maybe human nature is just human nature. And if human nature is just human nature, then what do you do with human nature? Do you change it? Do you fix it? Do you stamp it out? What can you possibly do with human nature? One idea that I have is that if you want to eliminate financial booms, busts, crashes, you can eliminate human nature. Except the only way that I know to eliminate human nature is to eliminate humans. So the only way, now you might say logically this doesn't really work, Mike, but the only way to eliminate market bubbles and crashes is to get rid of people. Think about that. Think about what that means. Now you might say, on the surface, that sounds slightly crazy. You're going too far, Mike. What are you talking about eliminating people? The supply of human beings is constantly replenishing, constantly a new supply. One generation learns, and it doesn't necessarily get passed along to the next generation. Perhaps you see it in something like architecture or medicine. But when it comes to money, greed and fear, those don't get passed along. Because everyone knows they've got limited time on the planet, and you got to get yours while you can. So we go to our base way of acting, and the base way of acting is kind of like an animal. If that market is booming up, we're just going to get on it and go with the crowd no matter what. We don't have to have a plan. If the crowd is screaming, there's the exit, there's the entry, whatever, we're going with it. Now, of course, if you take that particular approach, you'll also leave with the crowd. And look, at the top of a bubble, not everybody gets out with profits. It just doesn't work that way. Let me play another excerpt from this BBC presentation.
I love relatively simple models. Other people like more complex models. And the models became more and more mathematical, more and more abstract, and less realistic in terms of what was happening to the economy. So the problem that I had is that what he was saying, well, first it was hard to model. So if it's hard to model, you kind of forget about it.
Minsky's approach is what we call narrative. Or to put it another way, he was less about maths, models and formula than he was about ideas expressed in words. Many of the greats, from Adam Smith to John Maynard Keynes to Friedrich Hayek, worked like this. But in recent decades, the economic discipline has become more technical, more mathematical and more model-based. Words might allow you to express complex ideas, but maths is more precise. And by the eve of the financial crisis, this was the dominant approach. Wendy Carlin is Professor of Economics at University College London.
Even some of the very best real-world-oriented macroeconomists were, if you like, seduced by the calm that had come over the global economy during the 1990s and 2000s. So there was a kind of sense of satisfaction that we, the economists, understood the world better, and policymakers were making better policy. And meanwhile, what was happening is that underneath there were growing sources of vulnerability to a crisis, and we just weren't looking for them.
And here we arrive back on the eve of the financial crisis. Minsky long dead and largely on the margins. Mainstream economics happily basking in the glow of what was called the Great Moderation. Boom and bust consigned to the dustbin of history. And US banks in particular making riskier and riskier mortgage loans, then repackaging them to look like the safest debt. To Minsky, we were in the Ponzi stage of finance. Stability had proved destabilising. Adair Turner.
I think as a description of what happened in the US mortgage market, and in particular in the US subprime mortgage market, in the years before the crisis, that is absolutely clear. And then other people referred to the phrase a Minsky moment. It's almost like the point where, the chap's run off the edge of the cliff and he suddenly realizes there's land underneath him, where people suddenly become aware that these prices appear unsustainable. And a fall in price begins to occur and confidence evaporates. And you get a very, very strong self-reinforcing downward spiral. And I think that interpretation of what has occurred, is a good interpretation of what occurred in autumn 2008.
There's a certain arrogance in the professorial, academic, central bank community. How in the world can these so-called bright people ignore the tulip auction in 1637 and act as if there was a great surprise about a bubble bursting? We had just seen in the last, 8 years before that, we had seen the dot-com bubble burst. Now, the retrospective that I'm playing excerpts from, that's from the last few years. How could economists, these so-called great minds, be so surprised about what happened in the fall of 2008? Especially considering what happened in March of 2000. Again, it gets back to my point, and I've heard Liz Cheval, one of the turtles, mention this, chronocentricity, this egotistic attitude where each generation is somewhat smarter or better than the prior generation, and they elevate themselves to this super high level, and they learn all the lessons of the past, never to make a mistake again. Life just doesn't work that way. The markets don't work that way. What are the markets? The markets are me and you. That's the markets. It's me and you trading. And if you don't want to trade with me and I still need to sell, then I need to keep dropping the price, hoping you will eventually buy. You see, this is very normal. It's been normal since the dawn of time. It's been normal since monkey time. Not joking. Look at the work of Laurie Santos. She's appeared on my podcast. Monkeys behave just like us when it comes to fear, greed, and money. There's nothing different. We're the same. Genetically, psychologically, literally. Frightening stuff, huh? Let me offer a few more pieces of insight about Minsky. He came up with this financial instability hypothesis that's been mentioned. And later, economists attributed to him the term the Minsky moment, which is the moment when the whole house of cards falls down. And what this means is Ponzi finance is underpinned by rising asset prices. And when asset prices eventually start to fall, then borrowers and banks realize there is debt in the system that can never be paid off. Of course, then people rush to sell assets, causing an even larger fall in prices. And Minsky's thought process was that there's a certain financial instability. He called this the financial instability hypothesis. When did capitalism become some perfect straight line up? I'm sure Minsky was a brilliant guy. But to say that there's instability in capitalism, and then everyone jumps up and down 25 years later and says, what a wonderful insight. This is how we can now stop the next bubble from happening. Give me a break. It doesn't work that way. But that's not where the Minsky story ends. The Minsky story is continuing, and it will continue, and it won't stop. Because all of the academics, the regulators, the central bankers, they've adopted Minsky. Post-2008, Minsky is their savior. What's the simple way that he has become their savior? Minsky said you need to offset that instability. Offset the instability. Well, that's a very academic way of saying, essentially, let's plan the economy. Let's rig the prices. So if you see stocks at all-time highs, you should probably look around the room and see what a regulator, a central banker, a politician has done to potentially get those all-time high prices in stocks. You, the audience out there, know one thing right off the top of your head: you no longer have interest income. And for many of you, it's become negative interest income, meaning you now pay the bank to keep your money there. That's one of the ways that you can offset instability. At least that's one of the ways they think they can offset instability. Because all these regulators and all these central bankers clearly believe that they can control the levers so they can push the stocks to XYZ level, drop interest rates to nothing or negative, and then, of course, from their perspective, there's no chance for a crash. I mean, this is a planned economy not unlike what the USSR was dealing with in the 1980s. Now, somebody out there might say, somebody with a PhD in economics, they might say, Michael, you do not have the credentials to make that statement about economics. You do not understand, Michael, the full sweeping scope of Minsky's work. You're choosing bits and pieces. We have figured this out because now that Minsky has given us the justification, the momentum to act, we now can stop bubbles. We know the secret. Minsky has given it to us. Now, of course, all of the work of Daniel Kahneman is thrown out the door. Kahneman, who clearly says the idea of debiasing human nature isn't going to happen. There's no evidence it's going to happen. Back to my point that I've made throughout this podcast episode, greed and fear and making money is a driver for so many of us. But now, armed with the Minsky thought process, the Minsky hypothesis, policymakers now think they can spot bubbles before they inflate. This is the foundation in 2016 that we're operating under. So with stocks at all-time highs and central bankers all lockstep in line with this dead economist views, they can jerry-rig, engineer, control, maintain, plan everything about the economy and markets. That's their belief now. Kahneman's work out the door, Vernon Smith's work out the door, Nassim Talib's work out the door. None of that stuff matters. Because now it's all controlled. That is frightening. I mean, a young kid in high school can look at all of this and from a common sense perspective, just say, wow, well, we're not going to be able to stop human nature. We're going to keep blowing bubbles and popping bubbles. The sadistic part of this is that the politicians, the regulators, the central bankers spend so much time on their propaganda to convince you, the investor, you, the general public, that they've got a handle on it all. They sneak into your bedroom at night while you're sleeping, and they essentially get in bed with you, and they give you a kiss on the forehead, maybe even a kiss on the lips, a warm embrace. Maybe they bring you nice warm milk at night. They make you feel like you're cared for. Now, they're really sick, and I don't say this in a medical way, but in a mental way, they're sick caregivers because they really have no interest in you at all. The only thing they have interest in is keeping power. I repeat, the only thing the regulators, the politicians, and the central bankers have, the only interest they have is to keep power and to lord over you, to control you. I look back over the last 10 years and I look at the films that have come out that detailed the Great Recession. My film, Broke the New American Dream, was actually the first film. Now, that's a little dumb luck on my part because I was working on this film while the crisis was unfolding, not after the crisis unfolded. So I had an interesting perspective. But I also took a message in that film, and that message of politicians just wanting to sit in the seat to lord over you is part of my film. But my messaging in that film is quite different than all of the other retrospectives. Because my film wasn't really a retrospective. I went ahead and I put forward the trend following philosophy in such a way that people could understand this will continue to happen. It's not going to stop. Now, I used the current events, 07, 08, 09, as the backdrop. But those are just an example of the time. And the time will always change. The events will always change. There will always be another one. But of all the films that came out to go back and look at this particular period and try to analyze, These other films, it was just the same old, same old. The banks were bad people. Wall Street's bad people. The regulators messed up. Human nature doesn't work. We can fix it all. It reminds me of Trivial Pursuit. We watch these retrospective documentaries on the financial crisis, and we go, ooh, wow, look at that. That's amazing. I can't believe that happened. Look what happened under Ben Bernanke and Janet Yellen. Wow, amazing. And then you roll forward 10 years and the same people are in control of the entire situation. But now they've read Minsky's work and they're prepared for the next one because there won't be a next one because they're so fucking smart. They can fix it all. Now let me ask you the big question. Do you really want to bet on central bankers? Do you really want to bet on regulators? Do you really want to bet on politicians? And do you really want to bet on them now armed with their new Minsky thought process? Or, I get back to my film and my direction, the trend following perspective. Or, do you want to look at a model that's not like their models? Because their model is all about predicting. They create this intricate, elegant model that supposedly can't break. It's perfect. Just like the guys at long-term capital management. They have the elegant model that can never break. Trend following is the exact opposite. Trend following is not a model in that sense. Trend following is more of a philosophy. And you just so happen to use the markets and math to execute that philosophy. What's the philosophy? Really simple. There will be booms. There will be busts. Nobody can predict any of this, but there's still a way to make money. Let me say that another way. You know what's useful from my perspective about behavioral finance and behavioral economics? Number one, people will never be rational. It is not changing. People are never going to be rational. Number two, markets will thus always trend up or down. Sideways too. When or how is that going to change? If you understand what a market is, me and you trading, and we don't have to agree on price, and if we don't have to agree on price, then we're left with what? A trend, of course. Number three, you can't predict trends. None of this stuff can be predicted. Oh, sure, The Big Short was a fantastic movie, and Michael Burry was smart enough to have a particular piece of intelligence and took a bet that won out big for him. But you know what? Other people knew that information and took bets and didn't get the same gains he did. And Burry's only executed that strategy one time. There is no Burry track record over 40 years like Bill Dunn, for example. So I give Burry all the credit for spotting that one bubble. But his strategy is not exactly robust. He doesn't have the ability, nor has he proven to have the ability, to capture the next bubble burst. The next bubble burst. Where's the evidence? Shouldn't we all be driven by that, the evidence? To restate, people will never be rational. Markets will thus always trend up or down. You can't predict trends. Number four, there are ways to make money even though 1 to 3 are set in stone. Numbers 1 to 3 are not going to change. I mean, they're etched in rock. It's granite stuff here. No change, no possibility of change. Now, you can go down the path of trusting regulators. You can take that warm embrace at night, that nice glass of milk that they serve you, let them tuck you in, and have pleasant dreams and pretend everything will be taken care of. But for those of you out there that don't trust the system, that don't want to trust the system, that know the system is a big lie on top of a big lie, on top of another big lie, wrapped in another big lie, all organized and engineered by a guy or a girl standing behind a curtain, not unlike the Wizard of Oz. If you want to go that path, be my guest. But for those of you that don't want that, for those of you that want a chance, and those of you that I'm talking about are in the minority because the majority will never go this direction. By definition, the majority will trust the regulators and trust the central bankers and trust the government to take care of them. That's just the way it works. But if you don't mind being outside the system, if you don't mind being alone in your thinking, well, at least you can listen to this podcast and you realize we're not alone. We're connected in bits and bytes across the digital landscape. But by and large, most people won't listen to you. Most people don't want to talk about this. Most people will say you're being a worrywart. You're scaring yourself for no reason. You've got a bunker mentality. No, I don't have any of those things. I'm a pretty happy guy. I just know how the system works. I know what they're trying to do, and I know why they're trying to do it. And all I can do, the only thing I can do, the only thing you can do is we can follow market prices and we can take action. We can decide to buy or sell XYZ market price and try and end up with more money than we started with. That's a hell of a lot more simple and a hell of a lot more concrete than looking at what the regulators, the bankers, and the politicians are going to do with Minsky's work. Because Minsky's work is carte blanche for them to control everything. They feel like they've been given the keys to your car and they will drive it whenever they want to deliver to you whatever they want to deliver to you. And you're at their mercy. And for those of you that don't like to be in a constant experiment put on by Ivy Leaguers in bad suits and bad haircuts and bad bodies, trend following is your absolute peace of mind. It's my mission and my passion to spread this message. Get one of your family members, get one of your friends, bring them over to the other side. Get them to see a new perspective. There is a way around all this chaos. There is a way around the next bubble implosion. But you need to take action. If you just sit there and you just wait, you know what's going to happen. Something a little different this week. Back-to-back monologues. I did 2 takes. Not on purpose. The one that you just listened to was my second take. What you're about to listen to is my first take. Why 2 takes? My audio engineer, Steve, he listened to my first take and he said, "This is too aggressive. You really shouldn't put this out there." I listened to it and I agreed with him, as long as I beeped the F-bombs. There were just too many F-bombs. It sounded too hard. Maybe not too hard for a bunch of guys playing baseball together, but for the whole world to listen, it was too hard. So what follows is my first take for my monologue for this week, with the F-bombs beeped. I hope you enjoy. Today I want to go back into the past a little and bring it to the future. February 5th, 1637. February 5th, 1637. You were there. You don't know you were there, but you were there. Because every event that's happened after February 5th, 1637 was just like the event on February 5th, 1637. They've been no different. They were unexpected. They were a surprise. And markets absolutely cratered, collapsed, smash, boom, down. So what happened on February 5th, 1637? There was a tulip auction in the Netherlands. Guess what? No buyers showed up. Just sellers. No buyers showed up at all. Bulbs went from 5,000 guilders to 50 guilders. Can you spell epic collapse? I rekindled that memory and that date by watching a film the other day, a film from one of the Monty Python troupe. The name of the film? Boom, Bust, Boom. You already know where this is going. And like every other damn film that has come out since the Great Recession, they have followed a very familiar pattern. It goes something like this. The government doesn't know what they're doing. The regulators relaxed everything. We created an epic bubble, and it popped. Oh, and by the way, human nature is such that we do this all the time. Now let's try and find a fix to make human nature not do what human nature does. Every last freaking film in the last 10 years has followed that same script, except one. And I'm cocky enough to say that I was the producer, director, writer of that one because my film broke the new American dream. While I am not sitting back and trying to tell you it was cinematic art, the message far superior than every other film that's come out in the last 10 years on a similar subject. Because I gave a solution. I said, this isn't going to change. Human nature is not going to change. The markets will go up. The markets will go down. They will go sideways. And right when you get to the point in time where one generation is learning a lesson and perhaps is going to pass it down, that generation dies. They move on. And the next generation comes along and they think their doesn't stink. And they're smart. And it's a new age, a new wave. It's different this time. It's always different this time. The justifications, the rationalizations, the reasons why XYZ market should be at all-time highs. Well, the crowd starts to believe it. And then once the crowd starts to believe it, it starts to go even higher and higher and higher and higher. And one day, no buyers show up. Just like on February 5th, 1637 in the Netherlands. No buyers show up. 5,000 to 50. That is a drop of magnificent proportions. But you know what? That drop of magnificent proportion, that's exciting. It's exciting, especially if you happen to believe in the idea that there could be bubbles. Because you can make a lot of money. You can make a lot of money when the crowd goes nuts. You can make a fortune when those extraordinary delusions, the madness of crowds, when it unfolds. And it will always unfold. It will never stop unfolding. The trick is, if you know that madness, that euphoria will never go away, and markets will always race to an all-time high, and then always race in the other direction, if you've got a plan, you can protect your capital and grow your capital. If you have no plan, you are a lemming jumping off the cliff, following the other lemmings. And when you land 100 miles an hour hitting the water from 100 meters up, and you're dead broke and you're laying there and you look up and some politician says, let me give you a kiss. Let me give you a kiss on the lips. Let me resuscitate you. Let me give you a warm embrace. And you, being stupid, laying there on the ground, dead, look up and say, oh my gosh, Mr. or Mrs. Politician, please use a little make me feel good. Make me feel damn good today. You might call that a tangent, but that is exactly what people do these days. People don't think. It's all emotion. People have literally made lovers out of politicians and central bankers. They love them. Perhaps even physically, for all I know. I don't love any politician, any central banker. These are hacks. These are people that are at the top. The elite that want to lord over you. They don't want to solve your problem. They want to sit in a chair and have you bow down, kiss their toe, and lick their ring. They don't want anything to do with you. They don't care about you. You're on your own. And the moment you learn that you're on your own, well, that's the moment you can start to make money from bubbles rising and bubbles popping. Even though my film was not screened at Cannes, was not at Sundance, I dare you, find me a film out there that doesn't just give the same old messaging. government's bad, we blew a bubble, human nature can be fixed, supposedly. And it's all done in this kind of cute way. But no one ever says in these damn films, what do the smart people do? What do the people that you don't see on CNBC? What do the people that you don't see on Bloomberg? What do the people that you don't read about in the Wall Street Journal, the people that are the real winners, what do? They don't watch these films that say nothing. Those films are created for the masses. They are the opiate to keep you under lock and key, to keep you controlled, to keep you in the matrix, to keep you on your feeding tube. I don't know why I'm so excited today. I think it's for what I'm about to talk about in relation to the Great Recession. And frankly, what has become the great explanation to come out of the Great Recession. What is that great explanation to come out of the Great Recession? Hyman Minsky, an economist. Not very well known, but after the Great Recession, after all of the economists that led us to the, quote, Great Recession, after they basically said they didn't know what the hell they were doing, even though those same people are still in charge today, they now went back and they found what they consider now to be the secret sauce. This is called the financial instability hypothesis from economist Hyman Minsky. He argued that financial crises are endemic in capitalism because periods of economic prosperity encouraged borrowers and lenders to be progressively reckless. This excess optimism creates financial bubbles and then later busts. Therefore, capitalism is prone to move from periods of financial stability to instability. This is a type of market failure and needs government regulation. Why does it need government regulation? Because when the elites blow the next bubble and pop the next bubble, they need to steal the money from you to pay for the debts. But today, the very erudite economists sit around in documentaries like the one that I mentioned, Boom, Bust, Boom. And they sit there in that chair, in that smoking room, wearing that suede jacket and those loafers that no sane person would ever buy. And they sit back in the chair and they tell you how it is. So how is it? Well, they have all decided that this financial instability hypothesis, such brain work here, right? Capitalism is not, here's the gist of it, right? Capitalism is not perfect. It has booms and busts. What the is the revelation here? What's the news here? There is no news here. What it was is a new way to package government intervention, government hanky-panky, a new way to make the masses feel like the overlords have now figured it all out. And now they have figured it all out with the dead Hyman Minsky. The end result, more government regulation. The end result, the central bankers now know how to manage everything. Let me ask you a question. If the central bankers are managing everything, do we even have anything remotely close to free markets? If a bunch of suits from the Ivy Leagues sitting in dark, windowless rooms are, quote, managing the economy, isn't this like 1980s USSR? What are we? This is nonsensical. Before somebody writes me with some very PhD level explanation about how I don't get all this, and that there's this fine, very long white paper somewhere that explains all this, so I will better understand human nature, and that Daniel Kahneman is now wrong, Vernon Smith is now wrong, and there is this very, very elegant formula that has been pulled out of the dusty library bins that explains life. I don't think so. This said, Minsky is correct. Capitalism booms and busts. That's the normal course of activity. That is appropriate. There needs to be the great flood. There needs to be the great cleanse. This is normal. This is human nature. There will be excesses. There will be optimism. There will be pessimism. And if you ever think that that will go away, you will be the person that's sitting there holding a sack of shit in your hands. And when you open that sack of shit, there's not going to even be shit in it. There's going to be nothing in it because you're going to be broke because you trusted this whole damn system. There are some descriptions that I like from Minsky's work. For example, the Minsky moment, a term coined later by economists. It's the moment when the whole house of cards falls down. Ponzi finance, it's underpinned by rising asset prices, and when asset prices eventually start to fall, then borrowers and banks realize there's debt in the system that can never be paid off. People rush to sell their assets, causing an even larger fall in prices. So what? So what? How do you think you're going to stop this? The only way this can be stopped are for all human beings to be eliminated, because this is human nature. So if we kill all of the humans, we will kill all bubbles. There you go. There's your solution. Now somebody give me the Nobel Prize. Covel deserves the Nobel Prize for figuring out how to stop asset bubbles. Kill all human beings. It's great that Minsky brings this down to a simple thought process. Booms and busts. The problem is what he proposes and what his acolytes have proposed now is they want to offset this instability. Isn't that a fancy little phrase? Offset instability? You mean offset human nature? You mean offset what is in our DNA? We're just going to offset that with what? Are we going to offset it? We're going to offset it with weird-looking people in weird-looking suits with weird accents that run central banks. Because we can't trust ourselves, so we must trust those people over there behind the curtain. The same people that, of course, tell us we're against communism, we're against socialism, we're against a planned economy. But they've taken this Minsky, they've taken his work, and they've decided now the mission to stop the next bubble from popping. We're in the bubble, so now they want to stop the bubble from popping. So they have to offset the instability. For example, no interest income. For example, negative interest rates. You see, there is no free lunch. They can keep an asset bubble growing and growing and growing, but they have to do something else in the back room behind the curtain that you might not be looking at so closely to offset it. So armed with Minsky's work, the economist of today will now spot bubbles before they inflate, which means they have a secret machine that will go inside the brain of every human being that is participating in every market, and we will eliminate human nature. Because the policymakers now have the ability to spot bubbles before they inflate. I mean, I know I said a little manic today, but I mean, this is so entirely nuts. It's crazy, right? I mean, it's really absolutely nuts that people can think that they can have this type of power over the masses of humanity. Capitalism is great. Capitalism and free markets is great. Busybodies, suits from the Ivy Leagues, and people with what appear to be inbred, weird genetic modifications, the people that run the elite top. My God, how the hell do we get ourselves to this point? Look, as Daniel Kahneman has said, and I implore you to go listen to his podcast on my show, but as Daniel Kahneman has said, there will be no de-bias. It won't happen. We aren't going to fix human nature. Everyone can't feel good. Everyone doesn't get rich, and everyone doesn't get out at the top. I repeat, everyone can't feel good, everyone doesn't get rich, and everyone doesn't get out at the top. It only feels that way when you're at the top of the bubble. You know what's so useful from my perspective about behavioral finance and economics? Behavioral finance, behavioral economics, however you want to call it. Number one, people will never be rational. That ain't changing, ever. People will never be rational. Number two, markets will thus always trend up or down, or perhaps sideways. but markets will move. And that's the result of number one. Number three, you can't predict trends. No one can. Now, you might put together many millions of dollars of worth of servers co-located next to the exchange, and with your special access, you might be able to get some type of arbitrage opportunity that nobody else can because you happen to be married to one of Mr. JP Morgan's most distant daughters. Whatever, you know what I mean. You just can't predict trends. You can't predict markets. That's the bottom line. But considering 1, 2, and 3, people will never be rational. Markets will thus always trend up or down, and you can't predict trends. Number 4, there are ways to make money even if numbers 1 to 3 are set in stone, and they are set in stone. Of course, trend following is one of these ways. One of the most awesome ways. And that brings me back to the beginning of this podcast, my point about the financial films, the retrospectives that discussed all of the regulatory problems, the human nature problems, without ever giving you out there a solution. Because there are solutions for this stuff. I just mentioned trend following is one of the best solutions. And this is what really bothers me about this whole discussion. And frankly, the entire news circuit, the entire news channel business. All they give is information. They might give analysis. They never give wisdom. They never give wisdom. They never tell you at the upper reaches how things are really operating. And at the upper reaches, they're operating like the best trend following traders. There are so many great traders out there that you probably know about. And you probably think that you're familiar with their strategy. You've read about it in some book and you know their strategy. So many of those very famous traders, the ones that people know, they aren't trading the way that you think. They're trading like trend followers. They don't say it because the masses don't want to hear it. The media doesn't want to talk about it, but that's how they make their money. They're not stupid. Trend following is the solution. It will always be the solution. And it will always work because the masses, those connected to the matrix, don't want a solution. Because those people connected to the matrix, they really don't want happiness. They really don't want health. They really don't want money. What they want is to be like everyone else. And if everyone else is in misery and upset and angry, that's what the hell they want. They really don't want to be outside of the system. They want to be laying there at night, dozing off in sleep, having a nice little dream, imagining the kiss on the forehead from Janet Yellen. I know I've talked about that kiss before, and I know it's not a nice picture. I personally don't have that dream. I really hope you don't have that dream as well. But damn it, take a step. Take a step today and let go of some of this past thinking. Start to look at how you're being manipulated. Start to look at the propaganda all around you. Look for what's real. What can you measure? What can you touch? Don't trust anyone's opinion. Don't trust my opinion. Go verify it for yourself. Dig in and do the work. If you dig in and do the work, you're going to have a great life. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.